Have you ever witnessed a time when someone's dignity was tested publicly? How would I react if you were facing an injustice, knowing you could do something about it? Sometimes it is in unexpected situations that we find the true essence of humanity. The bell above the door sounded gently. When a woman and her 2 children entered, cautious steps echoing in the small space. Mariana's face, her mother, carried tiredness and worry, but her eyes settled on the shelves with one purpose: getting something for dinner. His son, Lucas, 10, wore an old jacket clearly too big for him. Little Isabella, holding her mother's hand, was curious to the products with a naive glow of hope. "Mom, can we take this?" Isabella asked, holding a packet of cookies, her eyes shining. With expectation, Mariana sighed, her sad gaze saying more than words. "No today, honey," answered gently, trying to hide the shame he felt. Lucas lowered his head and returned the package without complaining. But what seemed a silent and passenger moment caught the attention of someone. Raimundo, the owner of the store, a man in his early 50 years with a harsh look, watched everything behind the counter. For him, that scene was not new, and in his mind, he already knew exactly the kind of people they were. Before Mariana could put the few items on the counter, Raimundo abruptly left from the back of the box. "Hey!" His voice cut the air, scaring the clients around. Mariana cringed, feeling Isabella's hand squeeze her arm. The man pointed a hard finger at them. "If you don't have money, then don't waste my time here." The silence fell on the store. But before anyone could react, a strong presence arose from the bottom of the establishment. Dwayne Johnson, dressed in a simple way, but emanating an unshakable calm, took a step ahead. His serious gaze found Raimundo's, and what happened next would change everything. "This is not a friendship." Mariana looked away, feeling her face burn with shame. I have money," he said, his embargoed voice. He opened his hand, showing a handful of coins, too small to seem significant. "I just need these few items." Raimundo crossed his arms, staring at her with disdain. "A handful of bucks? This doesn't even pay bread." Lucas stepped ahead, the small body shaking with nervousness. "Please, Lord." His voice came out of the trembling. "My sister hasn't eaten since yesterday." The store owner laughed lightly, like a joke. "It's not my problem, boy. Now go out before I call the police." At the bottom of the store, a man who was apparently distracted, examining products on a shelf, put a package in his basket. His posture was quiet, but his gaze set out in the situation. He wore a simple black jacket and jeans without drawing much attention, but Dwayne Johnson's presence was impossible to ignore. Mariana held her children by the hand, the tears attached to her eyes. "Let's go." She turned to the door, but before she could take another step, Dwayne walked to the center of the store. Its movement was silent, but loaded with intention. He stopped between his family and Raimundo, his calm but unshakable expression. "Arrives." His voice was firm. The atmosphere was tense. Customers' murmurs ceased, and all looks turned to him. Raimundo, surprised by the intervention, raised his chin, challenging. "Who the hell are you?" spat the words. "This is my store, and I do what I want." Dwayne tilted her head slightly, keeping her gaze fixed. "Yes, it's your store," recognized. "But does this give you the right to treat people like that?" The owner of the store snorted. "Look, friend, if you want to buy something, buy. But don't tell me how to play my business." Dwayne stepped forward without haste, her tone remaining calm. "Having a business doesn't mean you can get people out of people. The only thing they still have, dignity." The silence dominated the space. Each customer in the store was now totally aware of the exchange between the two. Mariana and the children remained standing, watching without breath. Raimundo released a bitter laugh. "Oh, is it? And what are you going to do? Pay for them? If you think a hero?" Dwayne did not respond immediately. Instead, he took his wallet out of his pocket, pulled $100 a note, and placed it on the counter. This should cover their shopping, he said, his voice calm but firm. Raimundo looked at the note for a moment, speechless. The clients around began to murmur. Some shook their heads in approval. Others, inspired by the gesture, began to act. A middle-aged woman, holding a bag of vegetables, opened her bag and added a $20 note to the counter. "No child should starve," he said, his voice, laden voice. A young man wearing a faded t-shirt pulled some mashed banknotes. "This is wrong," he murmured, adding to the money that accumulated. An elderly gentleman with kind look put a hand on Mariana's shoulder. "We are with you," he said softly. "You're not alone." The tears finally escaped Mariana's eyes. She looked around, surprised by the unexpected generosity. I don't know how to thank," he murmured, his voice failing. Dwayne gave a slight smile. "You don't have to thank you," he said. "This is not charity. This is what people should do for each other." The mood in the store has changed. What was once a cold and hostile environment now became something different, more human. Raimundo, however, did not seem willing to accept that. His face turned red with irritation, and he hit his hands on the counter. "This is absurd," growled. "You are ruining my business. This is my store, and I won't let it turn it into a charity shelter." The looks at the store began to turn to him differently now. Dwayne remained motionless, without having to raise her voice to be heard. He just looked straight at Raimundo, as if waiting to see what he would do next. Dwayne stared at Raimundo, her serene expression, but charged with determination. "You're right," he said, the low but firm voice. "This is your store, but the way you treat people here says everything about who you are." Raimundo's face writhed with anger. "I don't need a sermon from someone who thinks it's better than me." Dwayne approached, her calm and unshakable look. "I don't think I'm better than you," he said in a quiet tone. "But I think you forgot what it means to be human." Customers, once mere spectators, began to murmur in agreement. "He's right," he shouted. "Someone in the background! That's not how people are about," added a woman near the cashier. "Expel people who just want to feed their children? This is not right." Raimundo realized that he was losing control of the situation. He looked around, seeing the disapproving glances of customers. He squeezed his lips, snorted, and raised his hands in frustration. "Okay, take your shopping and go out," said, the voice loaded with impatience. "Just don't come back." Dwayne remained motionless for a moment, then stuck her hand in her pocket and pulled another $100 note, placing her over the counter. "These people don't have to go back," he said, a calm but heavy, loaded voice, "because today they will take everything they need." Mariana widened her eyes, hesitating. I don't know what to say," murmured the embargoed voice. "We don't deserve it." Dwayne put her hand kindly on her shoulder. "Everyone deserves compassion," he said simply, "and no child should go to bed hungry." While Mariana, still incredulous, was beginning to collect the items for her children, customers followed Dwayne's example. A woman put some notes on the counter. "No mother should go through this," he said. A young man withdrew some coins from his pocket and placed them beside. "This is the least I can do." An elderly gentleman approached Mariana and smiled gently. "You're not alone." Mariana's eyes filled with tears. I don't even know how to thank." Dwayne smiled. "No need to thank," he said. "This is not a favor. It's just what people should do for each other." Lucas approached slowly, holding a small package of cookies, the same one that had returned before. Can I take this too?" asked softly. Dwayne bent down, standing up to the boy. His gaze was warm. "Of course," he replied. "But remember to share with your sister." The boy smiled, holding the package against his chest. "Thank you, sir. You're the coolest person I've ever met." Dwayne laughed softly, messing up the boy's hair. Nothing, friend, just don't forget, kindness generates kindness. The store, once a cold and tension-laden place, now seemed different. People smiled at each other. Some still added money to the counter. Others offered words of support to Mariana and her children. A woman approached and handed her a double paper. "This is my phone," he said softly. "If you need help getting a job or a better place to stay, call me. I know what it's like to go through it." Mariana's voice failed. "Thank you," he murmured. "I didn't expect to find so much generosity." Dwayne remained by the counter, watching everything without haste. His gaze, however, was still fixed in Raimundo, which now seemed uncomfortable. The man squeezed his fists by his body, his narrowed eyes, unable to hide his frustration. Finally, unable to contain his anger, he exploded. "You think it's some kind of hero, don't you?" Mocked, his voice loaded with resentment. "Arrives here, do a show, and now everyone thinks I'm the villain." Dwayne tilted her head slightly. His expression has not changed. "It's not about being a hero," he said calmly. "It's about doing what is right. Maybe you should try, at least once." Customers muttered again, and Raimundo realized that there was nothing more to say. A young man from the crowd crossed his arms. "You could have dealt with it in another way," he said, shaking his head. "Instead of expelling them, it could have shown some compassion." Raimundo threw an angry look, but was silent. Dwayne turned to customers and spoke, her firm but serene voice. "Every day we have a choice," he said. "What kind of people do we want to be? Let's ignore the suffering of who you need, or are we going to make a difference when we have the chance?" The store was completely silent. Even those who hesitated to get involved initially now felt a slight satisfaction to position themselves. An elderly man stepped ahead, gently put his hand over Raimundo's shoulder, and spoke with a calm that disarmed any resistance. "Son, you have a good deal here," he said, the firm but kind voice. "But if you keep treating people in this way, you'll lose more than money." For a moment, Raimundo's gaze hesitated, and it seemed that something inside it touched him. Perhaps guilty, or the subtle feeling of being observed otherwise. But soon he covered it with a scowl and grunted, "Okay, so much." Dwayne didn't force the conversation anymore. Instead, he returned to Mariana and her children, who were at the door, with her bags in her hands. "Ready to go?" he asked, his now softer tone. Mariana nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Yes, we are. Thank you so much for everything." Before leaving, Dwayne crouched down to Isabella's height, who kept a tight teddy bear against her chest. The girl had kept quiet all the time, but her gaze was now curiosity. "Take care of your mother and brother, okay?" Dwayne spoke with a warm calm. "You are stronger than you think." Isabella nodded shyly, a small smile forming on her face. "Thank you," whispered. Dwayne watched her as she walked away, her family starting to leave the store, the air between them now lighter. The generosity and kindness that had been shared there gave a sense of relief and hope. The other customers still muttered to each other. Some continued to put money on the counter as a gesture of support. Dwayne turned one last time to Raimundo. "You have a chance to do the right thing," he said firmly, but without grudge. "Think of the type of person you want to be." Raimundo did not answer, but the silence between them was more significant than any word that could be said. Dwayne waved briefly and left, leaving behind a lesson that would stay with everyone there. When the doorbell sounded again, marking its departure, customers were starting to realize the impact of everything that had happened in that small space. Outside, Mariana and her children were standing on the sidewalk, organizing the shopping. Bags. Lucas squeezed his package of cookies. The smile on his face was a simple but genuine happiness. Dwayne approached them with quiet steps. "Do you have a way to go home?" he asked, with an always welcoming and calm tone. Mariana hesitated for a moment. "We usually take the bus," he said, looking at his children, "but the stop is far away." Dwayne nodded, thoughtful, and then, without saying a word, took off her cell phone from her pocket and made a quick call. "Don't worry, you won't have to walk until the stop today," he said, smiling gently. Mariana looked at him incredulously. "You've done so much for us," she said, her emotion-embargoed voice. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked, still not fully understood. Dwayne crouched a little to be at the level of her gaze. "Because sometimes we all need help," he responded softly. "And when you are in a position to help someone else, I hope you do the same." Meanwhile, inside the store, the mood had changed completely. Customers were now talking to each other, and the words they exchanged with Raimundo were full of sincerity and constructive criticism. "You have the power to make a difference here," a man said, his voice firm. "Maybe it's time to start using it." A woman with a kind smile approached and added, "People remember how you treat them. A little kindness can make all the difference," said the elderly man who had spoken with Raimundo before. Raimundo was silent, his clearly agitated mind looking at the money stacked on the counter, a symbol of what he had just witnessed. He said nothing, but his expression showed that something had broken inside him, a crack that could mean the beginning of a change. Outside, the car that Dwayne had asked for arrived. It was spacious and comfortable, and soon Mariana and her children were on their way home safely. Before entering the car, Mariana turned to Dwayne once again. "Thank you," she said, her voice loaded with emotion. "You gave us more than just food today. You gave us hope." Dwayne just waved with a serene smile. "Take care of yourself," he said, "and remember you're not alone." The car walked away, and Dwayne stood on the sidewalk, watching until they disappeared around the corner. He allowed himself a small smile, knowing that he had made a difference somehow. Back at the store, the elderly man approached Raimundo again with a curious look. "Do you know who that man was?" he asked, his voice full of interest. Raimundo shook his head, still looking shaken, but his expression now had something different, perhaps the seed of a silent change that only time could reveal. Raimundo murmured, still trying to soothe everything. "I don't know who he thinks he is." The elderly man smiled softly. "He knows exactly who he is." Raimundo frowned. "What do you mean?" The Lord crossed his arms, his gaze loaded with something between respect and admiration. "That was Dwayne Johnson." The store owner froze, his eyes widened. "The actor?" he asked, almost not believing. The elderly nodded. "The only and unmistakable." The clients around began to whisper, and some took their cell phones to confirm what they just heard. Some seemed surprised, others just swung their heads as if they already knew they had witnessed something special. Raimundo remained motionless, behind the counter. His gaze fell on the money left by customers, and for the first time he saw that not as an affront to his business, but as a reflection of his own rigidity. The Lord spoke again, with a quiet but firm tone. "You can still change, not only to your store, but to yourself. People remember how they are treated." Raimundo took a deep breath. "I never thought that way," admitted, his voice lower than before. "I always worried about the numbers." The old man smiled sideways. "It's never too late to start worrying about people. You have seen today what a simple act of kindness can do." Outside, Dwayne was walking down the sidewalk, her fixed gaze ahead, mixing with the natural rhythm of the city. He didn't need recognition. What mattered was to know that that day he had really helped someone. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked at the screen, a message from his assistant reminding him of a charity event that night. For a moment he stopped, launched one last look at the store, where people still seemed to reflect on everything that had happened. A subtle smile came on his face. That experience, in a way, had been more significant than any charity event. Inside the car that Dwayne had arranged, Mariana and her children were accommodated, purchases stored in the trunk. Lucas, still holding the packet of cookies, looked at his mother with eyes shining with curiosity. "Mom, do you think he was a superhero?" Mariana laughed softly and ran her hand on her son's hair. "Maybe not a superhero," he said, "but definitely someone special." Isabella still embraced her teddy bear, looked at her mother and whispered, "He made me feel important, as if we mattered." Mariana's chest squeezed. She held her daughter's little hand and smiled. "We imported," he said firmly, "and one day, let's return this kindness." The car walked away, taking with him a family that, until a few hours earlier, carried an invisible weight of despair. Now they took something different. In the store, customers started out, some still talking about what they had witnessed. The elderly lord came out with a satisfaction look, certain that, even if small, a seed of change had been planted. Raimundo remained behind the counter. He looked back at the money left there, but this time with a different weight on his chest. Dwayne continued her walk, mingling with the city as if nothing had happened. The day was finishing, the sky dyed with orange and pink tones. He looked up at the horizon and, for a short moment, a small smile was allowed. Just as a simple act of kindness can transform one day, a small gesture of yours can make all the difference. Subscribe to the channel and join us for more stories that inspire and show the power of empathy.